Welcome to the Divine Soul Journey Evolved podcast, your space for all things awakening, healing, and consciousness shifting. I'm Stephanie Jameson, psychic medium, author, spiritual, and heart-based business mentor, here to help guide you through the incredible, sometimes wild, yet always transformative journey of spiritual evolution. Together, we'll dive deep into thought-provoking conversations, perspective-shifting insights, heart-awakening moments, and reflect on conscious relationship growth. This podcast is designed to be a safe space for awakening and evolving souls, a place to inspire, motivate, encourage, and let's be real, at times may even trigger you into the next version of who it is that you're being invited to become. If you're feeling the call to step into your highest self and embrace the magic of some serious transformation, you're in the right place. Because soul growth and evolution is meant to be beautiful, empowering, and yes, despite how it may feel at times, even fun. So take a deep breath, set the intention to open your heart, and let's dive in. Hi, Carlos.
Hi, Stephanie.
It's good to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. It's exciting to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited, and I find your work fascinating. You know, you're a maverick biologist, a historian, and you're exploring the nanobiome of consciousness inside of our cells. So when I first met you, I was like, hello, we have to have some kind of a conversation here because this is fascinating. I find your work just incredible. And so I wanted to take a moment um, to just say that to you. And we're going to be focusing on this episode today how important our intentions are and how they're actually more powerful than our DNA. And that is a bold statement. That is a bold statement. So before we get into that, we have lots to talk about. I'm just kind of curious, your backstory, as I mentioned, some of your credentials, but I'm kind of curious, was there any kind of a catalyst or an awakening that kind of led you down this path?
Well, it's a good question. To be honest, I also find the work fascinating, and I think my relationship to it of amazement and gratitude that I get to research these topics is because a lot of this doesn't come from me, and I love that you are a medium, because I think you can really get me in the sense that I feel I was called to do this work and I have received so much help, from consciousness of other realms. I don't even know how to call them, but it really feels that as a collective, as a human society, we are reaching a point where we are reconnecting with spirit as the main driver of life on this planet, and from this place of connection with the spirit, it feels that a lot of work in biology is being done around the world. And it feels that for me, there was a point around 2021 when a friend of mine, who's also a medium, told me, there's a baby who's interested in arriving to your family. And if you listen to her call and if you welcome that soul into your family, then you and your wife will be able to bring new elements of knowledge to the world of biology. And for me, that was like a crazy statement at the time. I was not familiar with mediumship. I was not familiar with a lot of things. But however, something in my body said, yeah, this is an invitation for you. And I just jumped in, and it's been a fascinating journey ever since.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that. And I love that you were awakened through a medium or a psychic experience because, as you know, and I appreciate your kind words, you said to me earlier that you really love and respect that I bring that bridging that gap between logic and spirituality or logic and intuition. And I'm very passionate about that because I feel so much like we have this disconnect due to our programming and generational trauma and all the things that we've been conditioned to believe. And so I notice that there's this pendulum where people swing. They're either all logic or they're all intuition, and there needs to be a gap that's bridged there in order to get to the next level of consciousness, in order to have that shift. And so I find this fascinating, and I wanted to bring this up to you because you mentioned this to me last night when we were chatting, and I was like, "Oh, people need to know about this." You said to me, I have some notes here. You said to me that there was this disconnect. I asked you how Western science has ignored consciousness. And you answered me so beautifully about Napoleon and the Archbishop of Paris, the French Academy of Science, and this all the way, going all the way back to 1860, where there was some kind of an agreement made. And I feel like with where we're at on the cusp of this massive, in the middle of this massive awakening that's happening on this planet, people need to know about this because this information has been suppressed. And although intuitively we all feel it, our conditioning and our programming and the limited beliefs, that society has imprinted upon us keeps us so much from trusting in what we feel. And you're going to go into, the cells and the anatomy and all of that here in just a moment, but I feel like this is such an important thing for people to understand and know that this information has basically been hidden from us, and they
Yeah.
need to trust more in what they feel. So I would love for you to kind of elaborate what happened.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned that specific date, 1860, because it's relatively recent in the sense that a lot of the greatest scientists of, the Western world, and I'm talking about Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, René Descartes, Blaise Pascal, and so many people active in the 1600s, 1700s, they were deeply spiritual and they consulted astrology. They believed that they were exploring the intelligence of God expressed in the world, but they were coming from this humble position of saying, we as humans do not understand all the mysteries of the spiritual realm, but we can collaborate, with divine intelligence to develop useful things for humans instead of coming from this overambitious approach of saying, oh, humans are just so brilliant, and in our minds, we can completely explain the whole universe. And I think that current science, a lot of mainstream current science, comes from this approach of saying everything is completely understandable by logic. And that's actually a very limiting point to build science. And I would even say, for instance, Isaac Newton mentioned that what he proposed as the universal law of gravity and the way we could use mathematical equations to understand the orbits of the planets in the solar system, he specifically said this is like 5% of all the forces that are active, in our solar system. And the fact that all of the infinite amount of variables that are present in the planets allow them to stay in orbit. For me, Newton said, that's just a testimony of the power of God, the power of the divine. And so the way we forgot about Newton's words is that nowadays astronomists say, like, well, like 90% of the universe is dark energy, 5% is dark matter, and I don't get the percentages exactly right, but they keep on saying the same. Like, what we actually know about the universe is only 5%. The only change is that, unlike Newton, they try to use logic language to kind of forget about the fact that 95% of what happens is just impossible to explain from logic. And
Mhm.
that's a very recent thing, you mentioned Napoleon, and yeah, there was a specific agreement between Napoleon the Third, the Archbishop of Paris in France, and how to kind of officialize that from that moment on, it was not okay to talk about spirituality and science. But before that, it was completely normal. And I think right now, we're going back to understanding that it's a natural part of being human acknowledging the power of the divine in everyday life. And so a fully informed science and a fully intellectually honest science uh, cannot ignore the presence of a spirituality in everyday phenomena.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned to me, you explained that beautifully. Thank you. You mentioned to me that there was some kind of an agreement made. And I feel like this is super important to highlight because
Mm.
once that agreement was made, everything changed. And then Western beliefs, Western civilization took on that programming. And now that's what we've all been, our great grandparents, our great great grandparents, it can go back however long it goes back. That's all been conditioned into us. And now with this awakening that we're all growing through, um, we're unlearning. We're having to unlearn to relearn. So I feel like it would be really cool for you to highlight what was the agreement that was made.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what was happening in that historical context was that for the first time, the citizens were asking for a government that was not directly linked to the church. So, up until that point in Europe, all of the governments had the backing of the church, and the monarch, kings or queens, were considered divinely appointed. So, around that era in Europe, it was the first time that citizens said, hey, we want a government system that's not ruled by the Catholic Church. The thing is that the agreement was okay, let's build a new way to approach knowledge and the official state of science, because up until then, the Catholic Church was involved in the official state of science. And that had some advantages and that had some disadvantages. But the agreement that was completely artificial is to pretend that, just because they had this handshake behind the curtain, that it was possible to, from that moment on, have a government that was completely, lay, in the sense non-involved with religion, and that the knowledge system for that government was going to be completely separate from any spiritual endeavors or any spiritual language. And the science as a legitimizing system for modern governments is kind of a dangerous allegiance, because if government and science are perceived as the only authorities, then it's very easy for science to kind of not maintain objectivity, because from its conception in its current form, it has been perceived as a way to legitimize a government that's not inspired in the concept of people gathering around a spiritual identity, a cultural identity. Now, more even than any cultural or spiritual community, we are organized around governments that proclaim to follow objective science and an objective path towards progress. But that objective path towards progress does not always materialize, because there are just so many political and economical interests that get involved in the way. And I do not think these interests are necessarily evil, but we do not acknowledge, all the deviations from the paths that we can take, because we keep on pretending that science is completely objective and logical, and that's just not the case.
Right. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. That was so beautifully stated because as you know, the work I do intuitive work and I do energy work and I help shift people's consciousness. And along the path, obviously, myself included, I had to go through an unlearning and a little bit of a relearning process and kind of understand why I could feel certain things that made no sense to my logical brain. And I had to just kind of surrender to that. And now I'm teaching people how to do the same thing. Feel first, then act versus, letting the mind control us. I really do teach people that it's the wisdom of the heart. and the Heart Math Institute, and there are so many great other teachers and avenues to explore the wisdom of the heart, but it doesn't make any sense logically, and it can't be explained logically, but yet it's there, just like energy, right? We know energy exists. We can't see certain things all the time, but we can feel it. And so I really wanted you to highlight that to kind of substantiate even more the type of work and the knowledge that you're getting ready to bring through here, with these amazing visuals that you have. So, one of the things that you and I discussed was how meditation changes our red blood cells. You mentioned that during our initial meeting, and then you talked about changing our nervous system and our beliefs around, letting go of the idea that we know how our nervous system works. And one of the big things that I tend to encounter with the individuals that I've worked with on the awakening path is that most of the time when people are getting moved through their awakening, they are going through catalytic, catastrophic, or some type of an emotional event that's causing a shakeup in their life. And this is shaking up the core foundation of who they thought they were going to be, how their life was going to be, who they thought they were, what they believed. And they're having to do this whole, and then of course, their nervous system is in fight or flight mode. And so I would love to have you kind of highlight how we can heal through the power of intention and the science behind this. And I feel like the visuals that you brought to me, initially, and the visuals you're going to share today are going to be a powerful catalyst for those who are watching and listening to this, along with the book that I know you've written, which I'll mention here shortly. But I would love for you to elaborate on that. Like, we know nothing about our nervous system, compared to what it's capable of.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Well, to start with, I will say even the idea that the brain is the seat of consciousness is very recent and very incomplete. Before the 1800s, most scientists, including again Newton, Pascal, and many others, considered that the heart was the seat of consciousness. So even in European science, at the beginning of the modern era, the idea that our way to navigate the world involves feelings, emotions, and intuition was more present, than it is nowadays. So why does it matter to not consider the brain the only center of consciousness? Um, as I said, in Europe, but also in India, China, Egypt, the common practice of medicine was always that the whole body is conscious, and that you perceive through the intelligence of all of your body, and the main seat of intelligence is the heart, So whenever you want to feel truly guided and truly stable in life, center your consciousness, integrate all of what your body is telling you, and listen to how your heart integrates all of that. And that is relevant. And I'm going to share some visuals now because we come right now in medicine from a perspective of isolation. Like we can understand the body in isolated little segments. And from my perspective, it all comes recently or in the last century from a very specific moment around 1930, 1940, where scientists were very excited about seeing cells in this way, which is still being printed, in high school books, biology books. We believe that cells are isolated, that they are the basic unit of life, and that they can be completely chemically measured, and so we can have definite answers of how each isolated unit works. And the thing is, nowadays, we have better microscopes, we have better technology, and we have something like this, which is called holotomography. So the big difference is here we're looking at a cell that's not artificially endangered or disturbed by fluorescent lighting. Here, they don't use direct lighting, they just use infrared light rebounded by mirrors, so it's very non-invasive. And then we can see that cells are not isolated. They are always connected to the rest of the body. They are this flow of electricity created by these nanoorganisms around the nucleus. And it matters a lot because now we realize that these nanoorganisms hold the electromagnetic field of the cell, and they are extremely sensitive to emotions. So if we are living in a high stress job or an environment that just brings our energy down, then the energy of these nanoorganisms around the cell is going to collapse, and uh, cells are going to start to malfunction. And those that I just shared before are skin cells. These are connective tissue cells between muscle and bone, which are less fluid, but still there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of exchange. And the key to health is movement. The key to health is energy. And what happens when we embark on very negative thoughts, on not listening to our heart, on not surrounding us by a nourishing environment, is the same that happens to the electromagnetic field of the cell, what we're going to see just now. If we use fluorescent light, if we use something that's invasive, that's overwhelming, our cells are going to react like this. The nanoorganisms are going to collapse, and so the cell is going to lose its movement, it's going to lose its active energy. And all of our modern biology comes from studying collapsed cells, from studying overwhelmed cells. And that's kind of a reflection of where we stand of as a society, I believe, that we're expected to work as separate cogs of the social machine, and we're expected to always go for the um, highest paying job or the most successful career, and a lot of expectations that constantly keep us overwhelmed, and we are just like ourselves, disrupted in our electromagnetic fields. And then there's no wonder, that we will have all sorts of chronic diseases, and science is telling us officially that they have no cure, diabetes,
Mhm.
arthritis, so many things. Science is like chronic fatigue syndrome, very, very on the grow, and for all of these things, science is like, well, we don't understand what's happening, so there's no cure. You're just going to live with diabetes or chronic fatigue for the rest of your life. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, no, why are you saying that? You're just not seeing that we are electromagnetic vessels of consciousness, and that if we harmonize the way we experience that electromagnetic field, then cells regenerate, and we can restore health in so impressive ways, And this, just to close these visuals and stop sharing, this is the difference between holotomography and electron microscopy. So on the right, we see what's a frozen picture, and current medicine, current pharmaceutical industry is focused on trying to look at frozen pictures of the cell and making chemical measurements of those frozen pictures. They say, oh, you see, I think you are not producing enough insulin, so we're going to inject a lot of artificial insulin because the chemical measurement is saying we lack insulin. But that's trying to solve health from a frozen perspective of the cell, and not realizing that the energy of the cell is what really matters, and that divine intelligence is so complex and so amazing that by using just one factor like insulin or any pharmaceutical drug, you are not really creating harmony, or you're not restoring health. You're just introducing a new element into the disruption of the field. And what really brings back health is acknowledging the complexity and acknowledging that we are meant to reconnect with the spirit, and we are meant to provide energy to ourselves. And if we provide the energy, then divine intelligence is going to act in all of ourselves to restore communication. And once communication is restored, then harmony flows and the whole body starts functioning beautifully.
Beautiful. You literally just provided us with proof of what happens to our body when we don't honor our emotions when we're choosing fear over love, and when we're not following our heart. Beautiful. What do we experience? We experience dis-ease, and it's interesting that you would bring up insulin. I'm not going to go too much into this, but I tend to attract, especially as of lately, a lot of people who have these autoimmune disorders or insulin resistance, or and I start, or thyroid issues, or whatever, and I start talking with these people, or they're a part of my masterminds, or I do a reading for them or something. And what we discover is that there's trauma. There is some kind of something there. And I am not claiming to be a medical advisor at all. But it's very fascinating for me that energetically I pick up on this stuff. And what we discover over time is repressed emotions, trauma that hasn't been healed, or they're not trusting their intuition. They're choosing to live in a very fear-based environment, or they're in chronic fight or flight.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track, helping them navigate those situations, because really what we are realizing about the body is that we are kind of antennas, and every cell is just a space where electromagnetic information is being read. And if there's enough energy in the cell, and the electromagnetic information that we're receiving is harmonic, then the cell is always going to function beautifully. But if we're not receiving enough energy, we cannot do a correct reading. Or if we are getting distorted electromagnetic information, which as humans, this can be, as you mentioned, trauma, it can be fear. And then that really prevents the cell from correctly communicating with the rest of the body. And I would like to briefly share a study that I love, because you mentioned genetics, and we actually have very very simple evidence, that genetics in the case of cancer really doesn't make a difference, even if the commonplace belief is that genetics is the key to generating a lot of many types of cancer. We actually have a study where we can see that if a normal cell, which here is represented in green, we take the DNA of a cancer cell, which here is represented in red. So you can see in number 3, it's just a cell that it's originally healthy, and we introduce the faulty DNA. And even with the faulty DNA, if the cell is receiving the right electromagnetic information, then the cell is going to divide and grow normally, healthy. Whereas a cell that in the water of the cell, in the cytoplasm, has stored negative information. Even if we bring a healthy nucleus, a healthy DNA, that's not going to make a difference. It's about the energy and the information. It's not about the genetic material.
Wow, that's so opposite of what we've been taught.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would like to point here that for me, it's not a matter of scientists trying to lie to us, or trying to push an agenda. Of course, there are economic factors involved, and once an industry is set into motion, then it's very difficult to dramatically change the rhythm of that industry, or trying to bring new information. But for instance, with the case of DNA, the first papers that were published by Watson and Crick, they were very clear. We're not sure about this. What we have identified is that there's something called ATP outside of the nucleus of the cell, and that is involved in energy reactions in the cell. That we know. But we also know that something inside of the nucleus of the cell is like ATP, very concentrated, but it doesn't seem to be involved in energy reactions. So what does it make? And in the first paper, they mentioned We do not know. But then media went crazy about the idea that maybe humans have a mathematical code and that maybe science is going to be able to decipher life completely. And because media, became so excited about it, there was a hype and there were many interviews. And somewhere along the way, these scientists were kind of um, up level to the category of heroes or gods. And then they forgot that their own initial paper about genetic theory mentioned, we're not sure, this is just a theory. And then that gets lost along the way. And from my perspective, it's not due to evil, it's not due to malintention, it's just social dynamics. But I would like to point out that to this date, if you search on Wikipedia, a molecule of ATP, which is a molecule key in how energy is exchanged inside a cell, and a molecule of DNA with an adenine base, which is one of the four variations of DNA. But you look at them and they have exactly the same structure. They have a phosphate, they have a sugar called ribose, and they have adenine. And if you say, like, well, it's the same that it's inside of the nucleus and outside the nucleus, the most logical explanations nowadays is that DNA is simply highly compressed ATP, highly compressed molecules of energy that are needed when the cell divides. And so the chromosomes are simply this compressed energy releasing to achieve cellular division. But you are not programmed, you are not doomed for health or for disease based on your DNA. DNA is actually just compressed form of energy, and how that energy is used depends exclusively on the electromagnetic field that you create for your own body. And so we have way more agency than we're commonly taught.
Oh, I feel like I could talk to you all day long. This is exactly what I teach people is biofield health. In science we call it a biofield, in metaphysics we call it an aura. And
Yeah.
one of the programs that I've offered or information I've offered at retreats is how important it is to heal your biofield and to heal repressed emotions and limited beliefs and all of that good stuff. So I love that you just provided the scientific proof behind that, because a lot of people will look at it and they'll go, that's woo woo. And it's not woo woo, it's energy work. It's really owning your magnetic field, it's owning your aura, it's owning, all of that. And sometimes you have to reprogram that. And obviously you can, and you just proved that. And I absolutely love that. I do want to get to a couple other little topics before I let you go because we are running short on time. Um, One of the big things that I loved about the work that you brought to the table was that by bringing this science to the table, you talked to me about how this shows that we're all one, that we're all connected, that there's this unity consciousness. And I feel like that's so important because, at a time, the world is in such a state of separation. And one of the biggest things that I got when I first allowed myself to kind of start helping people and got moved towards my purpose, with people would say to me, how can you read me and you're not even physically in the room with me? How do you know all of this stuff and you're not even? And I'm, oh well, but I couldn't explain it all to them, but I was clairvoyantly seeing it, I was feeling it, I was in, I always try to explain to people, we're all one, we're all connected, and the more we can allow ourselves to remove this illusion of separation, the more we're going to evolve. And so, just very quickly, can you kind of touch on that?
Well, I'm not sure about very quickly, but I'll do my best. So,
Okay.
in two different ways, I believe we are all one. The first way is these nanoorganisms that we saw around the cell that create the electromagnetic field of the cell. They are the same for every living creature on Earth. So it doesn't matter if you're a tree, a rabbit, a blue whale, you're going to have the same nanoorganisms in your cell. So in a sense, divine consciousness is creating a beautiful game of biodiversity, using these nano agents of life to create all these different magnificent fields that are called species, different organisms. So biologically, there's that. But also from the perspective of where is consciousness accessed from and stored, there's, very cohesive evidence that our memories are not even in our brain. Our memories are in the electromagnetic field around us, and our brain is simply an antenna to connect and bring that memory into the integrated consciousness of the whole organism. And one very quick proof of that is there's this very famous patient in neuroscience that was called Henry Mollison, and Henry Mollison was a very odd case, and a lot of scientists studied him because he underwent a very bad surgery. They removed a large chunk of their brain, and they thought it was going to help with epilepsy. This happened in the 1950s, so science can be quite barbaric at times, even in recent times. But they did this damage to his brain, and what happened? He was not able to access personal memories. So you could talk to him now, and in 20 minutes, he wouldn't remember your name. But when you ask, like, who's the president, he will remember. If you ask, who are the Beatles, he will remember. And so this is a fascinating example of how he lost part of the brain that was able to synchronize personal memory of his personal magnetic field, but he still had access to collective memory. So for me, the work you do with your clients is more scientifically proven, than astrophysics or a lot of things that use scientific language, but are pure speculation. Whereas the idea that we really can connect with the electromagnetic field of other people and read into that, and there's a collective electromagnetic field of memory that has been demonstrated in so many experiments. And just because, as you said, of cultural programming, our programs lead us to believe that this is less scientific, but there's actually more evidence for that than for many of other things in science.
Carlos, I think you're going to make me cry. When you said that, I just got instant tears because thank you for that. Because I am a psychic medium, I am an intuitive, I am an empath, I am a coach, I'm a speaker. And I don't think that many people realize when you get moved into your purpose, the type of scrutiny that you can face around teaching people how to feel and to own their intuition and to own their heart wisdom. And again, there's so much woo woo around that, or conditioning around that. When you access that divine wisdom from within, somehow it's evil or whatever conditioning it is. And so I just want to say thank you, not just from me, but I promise you from other healers who are going to be listening to this, for bringing that science forward and validating that experience. I think that's so important to bridge that gap. Moving forward, uh, I know you have a book called The Love That Is Missing, An Explanation of Consciousness on Medical Science on Amazon, and I'm going to encourage everyone to go pick it up. I saw that you can buy a hard copy for $11.11. I think that's beautiful, or you can download it on Kindle. You can buy it for $4.44 on Kindle as well. I love all of that. A couple quotes I want to wrap up with, and if you can just kind of let me know where we can find you. I know there's products you offer for people who can't just work with you there in Mexico. I would highly encourage you share that as well. But a couple wrap-up quotes here that I love. You said to me when I first met you, you said, true healing happens when we stop saying that we know 100% what the nervous system does. And that right there, I was just like, I love that. And, just coming from your medical background, that was so beautiful to hear you say. You also said, give your body the energy and the neurons will heal yourself. And I really truly feel like as we move forward and more people approach their healing state from an energetic standpoint, that is going to resonate so much with people who are on this path. And the last quote was, allow yourself to receive and be healed by the intelligence of life. Wow. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So where can we find you? What do you feel like? Just one little quick, maybe minute here on what else you'd like to say to anybody listening.
Yeah, well, I always like to close with the message that your body is always serving the purpose of your soul, and your body always wants the best for what you envision for this life. Um, so I really would like to move past, the belief that our body can attack us or that our body can fail us. Our body is always um, our companion in this divine path of life. And if you embrace that, and if you ask for divine guidance on how to heal and live your most vibrant life possible, then your body is always there for you to create magnificent health. That's my closing message. And about where to find me, there's a website. It's called Biome.mx, and you can write an email to the address that's there. I'm sure you can put it on the show notes as well.
Yes.
And yes, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm just going to hit it hard with your credentials around this. You are a maverick biologist and historian who has literally been dedicating his life to exploring nanobiome consciousness inside of ourselves. You bring the proof, you bring the science, and we adore you and appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us on Divine Soul Journey Evolved. I'm truly grateful to share this space with you. If you'd like to dive deeper, please visit divinesouljourney.net to check out private readings, courses, mastermind workshops, and so much more. Also, just a reminder to check out the links below for any free gifts mentioned during this program that are available to you as you grow through your next level up. Until next time, keep honoring the illogical magic unfolding before you. Trust in your perfectly designed evolution, and remember that you are being divinely guided always.